A new Iron Curtain descends across Europe, forcing us to confront a stark choice. Pay now for peace, or pay far, far more later for conflict. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're trying to cut through some of the noise, get you quickly informed on, well, some really critical stuff unfolding across Eastern Europe.
Yeah, things are moving fast.
Definitely. I mean, just recently, Poland took this really dramatic step, sealing its eastern border with Belarus. Some people are already calling it a new Iron Curtain. And this isn't happening in a vacuum, right? Russia and Belarus have simultaneously kicked off these huge military drills, Zapad 2025, and they're openly simulating attacks on NATO.
Yeah, Zapad always makes people nervous.
You bet. And then you added this to the mix. Ukrainian drones just hit a major Russian oil terminal near St. Petersburg. Huge fire. Russia's reporting, get this, 221 drones shot down overnight.
Wow, 221. That's a lot of drones.
It's astonishing. So these aren't just headlines. You know, they're forcing us to ask this really fundamental question. What long-term strategy is actually going to secure our interests against, well, an increasingly emboldened Russia?
Exactly. And look, this isn't a crisis that's just going to, evaporate anytime soon. Our deep dive today is unpacking some new reports from major strategic think tanks, CSIS, AEI, the Heritage Foundation.
Right.
They've really meticulously laid out the real costs, the necessary steps for American security, and frankly, global security, too. It's a situation that, well, it absolutely demands a comprehensive long-term approach. So we're going to explore what that actually looks like.
Okay, so let's dive in. With these pretty stark events as the backdrop, the core challenge these reports are talking about is basically Containment 2.0.
Sort of, yeah. That's a good way to put it.
The CSIS report, for instance, it makes it pretty clear. Europe and Russia, they're going to be antagonists for the foreseeable future. And they argue Russia has this immense global disruptive power and shows a chilling willingness to take big risks.
Huge risks.
Even potentially a land incursion into NATO territory. I mean, that really makes you stop and think, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And what's really fascinating here is that echo of the Cold War you mentioned. This situation, it really does demand a long-term strategy, a lot like the containment policy the U.S. used against the Soviet Union for decades.
Right, Kennan's idea.
Exactly. But, and this is crucial, it's not just dusting off old blueprints. The CSIS report stresses this. It's got to be a complete refashioning for today's world.
How so?
Well, a new containment strategy has to critically account for the rise of China. China's not just enabling Russia's war efforts, it's rapidly becoming a global power in its own right.
A major factor.
Huge. And importantly, it also has to consider the potentially shifting role of the United States in European security. That's a big variable.
Okay, that leads us right into understanding the depth of Russia's threat now, its capabilities, its ambitions. And, it's actually pretty remarkable how, after 3 years of war in Ukraine, Russia has shown this, astonishing agility. It's kind of dismantled a lot of those pessimistic forecasts.
It really has. Russia's proved remarkably adaptable. They've effectively sidestepped a lot of the sanctions impact, kept energy revenues high, balanced their budget. Their defense spending, it's actually projected to hit a post-Soviet record 6.3% of GDP in 2025. And that climbs to 7.2% if you include related spending.
Wow.
Yeah. It suggests their economy can probably sustain this war effort for at least the next few years. And this is despite, staggering casualties, maybe around 1 million, and losing hundreds of tanks and artillery pieces every month.
1 million casualties, that's just hard to grasp.
It is. But they're estimated to be able to keep the war going at this intensity until at least 2027. The Kremlin is clearly learning, upgrading its methods, getting more emboldened, and that strongly suggests they're prepping for a future confrontation with NATO.
Within the next decade.
Within the next decade, possibly even a large-scale conventional war. That's what some analyses are pointing towards.
So it's not just about, tanks and troops on the ground then. We're talking about something broader, like a hybrid toolkit of aggression.
Precisely. That toolkit is extensive, and it's constantly evolving. It includes, relentless cyber attacks, these highly coordinated disinformation campaigns. You see them everywhere, designed to sow chaos and distrust.
Right.
And even things like artificial migration crises, basically weaponizing migrants at borders to destabilize neighbors. They use proxy actors, Wagner Group being the obvious one, but not the only one. They engage in airspace violations. They've even carried out assassinations or attempted them at Skripal in the UK, or that foiled plot against the Rheinmetall CEO.
The German arms company?
Yeah, exactly. All these tactics, they're designed to create chaos, undermine trust, interfere politically, basically weaken the West without necessarily firing a shot in a conventional sense.
And this reach, it's not just Europe's immediate neighborhood, is it? These reports talk about Russia's global influence being pretty strategic and wide-ranging.
Oh, absolutely. In its near abroad, as they call it, it's actively working to destabilize pro-Western governments. Think Moldova, Armenia,
Right.
and using hybrid tactics, energy deals, to influence places like Azerbaijan, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Georgia, Serbia.
And beyond Europe.
Beyond Europe, Russia's setting up these outposts of influence across the global south, Latin America, Africa, where they cleverly use anti-colonial narratives, often working with, let's say, unsavory actors like Wagner to get a foothold. In the Middle East, they're deepening ties with Iran, which, directly undermines Western counterterrorism efforts. And ultimately, the big picture, Russia's partnering with China.
The China connection again?
Yeah, promoting alternative institutions like BRICS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO. Their clear aim, really, is to reshape the whole liberal international order towards something more authoritarian. It's a fundamental challenge.
Okay, this brings us to a really critical and honestly kind of stark question. What's the actual cost to us if we don't meet this challenge effectively? The AEI report, the American Enterprise Institute 1, has some incredibly sobering numbers on the price of inaction.
It really does.
Their core argument is basically that supporting Ukraine now is, well, a good deal for America's security and our finances.
Yeah.
The U.S. has already put in $175 billion for Ukraine since 2022, with $112 billion of that for defense.
That's precisely it. And the AEI report asks this crucial what-if question. What if U.S. aid stops and Russia actually defeats Ukraine?
Yeah, what then?
Their estimate. It's chilling. It would cost the United States an additional $808 billion in defense spending over just 5 years.
With additional, on top of what we already plan to spend.
Exactly, on top of the currently planned budget, just to maintain security in what would be a significantly more dangerous world. Let that sink in. Almost $1 trillion extra just to catch up.
Wow, $808 billion. Those numbers are just huge. And the report breaks down where that money would even go, right?
It does. For manpower, they project needing about 266,000 more personnel. Mostly Army ground forces. That means 14 new brigade combat teams.
14.
Yeah. And just the cost for paying and keeping those people, an extra $20 billion over 5 years.
That would about the Navy.
Navy, a big reversal of the current trend of shrinking the fleet. They suggest adding 18 new battle force ships, things like extending the life of a Nimitz-class carrier, getting a new Ford-class supercarrier, more destroyers, more Virginia-class submarines, those advanced attack subs.
Right.
Total cost for just that naval expansion, about $50.3 billion. It's a serious buildup they're talking about.
And air power. Same story.
Same story, big numbers. An increase of 60,000 airmen, 555 more aircraft. Mostly those cutting-edge fifth-gen fighters like the F-35. They estimate needing 239 more F-35s.
Good grief, the price tag.
$108.7 billion,
Yes.
just for the air power boost.
Okay, so personnel, ships, planes. What about weapons, munitions, air defense? That's been a huge topic with Ukraine.
Massive. The demand would be enormous. The report projects $173.1 billion just for ramping up production of both offensive stuff, think precision bombs like JDAMs, GMLRS rockets, javelins, tomahawks, and critical defensive systems.
Like Patriot missiles.
Exactly. Hundreds more Patriot and THAAD missile defense batteries, thousands of interceptors. They actually list numbers like 2,845 Patriot PAC-3 MSEs, over 7,000 SM-6s. These are the missiles that shoot down incoming threats.
So just producing the ammo and defenses is another $133 billion?
Yep. And then on top of that, another $248.4 billion for infrastructure and readiness.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning building new facilities, hardening existing bases, fixing deficits at U.S. bases, and just way more combat readiness training. It's a complete and very expensive overhaul of our whole military posture.
And you can't forget space and cyber these days.
Absolutely not. The report pegs that at $36.5 billion for building more resilient satellite networks, better command and control, and expanding both offensive and defensive cyber capabilities. They even mention things like 20 bodyguard satellites to protect our other space assets and a whole new network of smaller satellites for better real-time intelligence.
It's just layer upon layer of cost. But beyond the money, which is obviously huge, the AEI report also talks about the human cost, doesn't it? if Russia wins.
It does, and it doesn't mince words. It paints a truly horrific picture. It explicitly states a Russian victory would trigger a massive refugee crisis, a humanitarian disaster, millions fleeing oppression, and that Russia would continue its, and I'm quoting here, indiscriminate murder of civilians, mass rape and pillage, barbaric torture and execution of prisoners, and kidnapping of children.
That's
Yeah.
a very stark reminder of the moral stakes here, not just the financial ones.
Absolutely. Which raises the critical question, okay, what's the best path forward then? What are the strategies these sources suggest?
Right. How do we avoid that trillion-dollar bill? And, more importantly, the human catastrophe?
Well, the sources are pretty consistent on a few key things.
Yeah.
The CSIS report, for instance, really emphasizes that the most cost-effective way for Europe and, by extension, the U.S. to contain Russia is actually by fully supporting Ukraine, militarily and economically.
So helping Ukraine weaken Russia now is cheaper than dealing with a stronger, victorious Russia later.
That's the core argument. Ensuring Ukraine can keep degrading Russia's military capabilities, even if U.S. support potentially lessens down the line, which, by the way, would mean Europe really has to step up its own contributions significantly.
Okay, so support for Ukraine is key. What else? Economic pressure.
Definitely. Economic statecraft remains absolutely crucial. Maintain that relentless pressure through sanctions, especially targeting oil revenues, that shadow tanker fleet they use.
Why oil specifically?
Because fossil fuel exports still account for something like 30 to 50% of Russia's entire federal budget. It's a major economic lifeline. It also means actively helping vulnerable states, Moldova, countries in the Western Balkans, to get off Russian energy. Cut that lever of influence Moscow uses.
Makes sense. And
Right.
strengthening NATO itself, particularly on that eastern flank.
That's another critical piece. Maintain a robust U.S. military presence in Europe, for sure. Increase military cooperation with our allies. But also, crucially, Europe itself must boost its own defense spending and integration. Build a unified force that's genuinely capable of defending the continent without having to rely solely on the U.S.
More European self-reliance.
Exactly. This also means things like a more robust air defense mission in Northern Europe, preparing for a Black Sea maritime patrol mission eventually when geopolitics allow.
Okay. Now, the Hudson Institute had a slightly different angle, focusing on what a just peace for Ukraine might look like, right? Beyond just stopping the fighting.
That's right. They advocate for some specific things, like a formal, long-term policy of non-recognition for any Ukrainian territories Russia controls. Similar to the Wells Declaration back in 1940 regarding the Soviet annexation of the Baltic states.
So never accept the land grab.
Never accept it legally or diplomatically. They also stress the need for real reconstruction aid for Ukraine, funded ideally by frozen Russian assets plus private investment and direct aid.
And dealing with the human consequences. Prisoners, abducted children.
Absolutely critical for a just peace. Prioritize the swift return of tens of thousands of POWs, political detainees, and especially those 19,000 plus Ukrainian children who were abducted. That has to be central.
And finally, Ukraine's own future.
Yes. Ukraine must, without question, keep the right to choose its own government, its own alliances, its own military size. No Russian veto. Preserving its full sovereignty is non-negotiable from their perspective.
Now, we can't really have this whole discussion without touching on that really thorny debate about NATO expansion itself. Was it a provocation or was it necessary protection?
Yeah, that's the elephant in the room, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
You have some pretty prominent voices. Even George Kennan, the guy who basically invented Cold War containment and publications like the American Conservative, who warned for years that expanding NATO risked fueling Russian resentment.
They argued Russia saw it as this kind of inexorable encroachment on its borders, not just a defensive alliance.
Right. And you sometimes hear echoes of that online, people drawing parallels to, say, the Cuban Missile Crisis. The idea that big powers just don't want foreign militaries right on their doorstep.
Sure, that argument exists, but then you connect it to the broader history, and you get the counter-argument from sources like the Heritage Foundation. They argue that Russia's expansionism is kind of inherent to its national identity, almost regardless of what the West does.
Meaning it would have happened anyway.
That's their perspective. They point to Russia's long history of expanding its territory, its deep-seated belief that Ukraine is part of its cultural and spiritual space. From this viewpoint, NATO expansion wasn't the cause of aggression. It was a defensive reaction to Russia's own actions, like the 2008 Georgia invasion, the 2014 Crimea annexation. And you look at Finland and Sweden joining NATO after the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. That seems like pretty strong evidence of countries seeking protection from an aggressive neighbor, not provoking them.
So we're left with this really profound dilemma, aren't we? Was NATO expansion, as some say, a fateful error that needlessly poked the Russian bear? Or was it an absolutely necessary step to protect independent countries from an inherently imperialist power that, based on its track record, was likely to act aggressively regardless?
It's a tough question, and the debate, as you said, continues. It has huge implications for how we move forward.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Navigated this really complex landscape of Russia's actions, the pretty stark financial realities of defense, and this crucial debate over the best way to secure Europe.
Yeah, and what really stands out consistently from all these different sources is the reality of Russia's enduring threat and the absolute imperative for a robust, smart, long-term strategy to deal with that new reality.
Exactly. And it really leaves you wondering, doesn't it? When you think about those deep historical roots of Russian imperial ambition, can true, lasting peace ever really be achieved just through negotiation alone? Or is, vigilant, well-armed deterrence the only truly reliable path to safeguarding liberty for the generations to come?
That's the question to ponder, isn't it? A difficult one.
Something for all of us to think about, definitely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.